Nitrous oxide. It's a kind of niche intoxicant today, not very popular with some people. It's very cold to the touch if you touch the balloon that's shown in the picture. It can be quite expensive, it can be difficult to obtain, it can be rather brief in effect and unsatisfactory. But it's persisted for a long time, not as long as the intoxicants such as alcohol and tobacco, because it has its own foundation legend, having been created to all intents and purposes by Sir Humphrey Davy in 1799 to 1800. And over time, after Davy's invention, it became very popular as in the form of laughing gas, as a method of entertainment. These two aspects of nitrous oxide or laughing gas as a serious scientific discovery and as an intoxicant or form of entertainment have been well studied by several scholars. I'd particularly mention the book by W.D.A. Smith, Under the Influence, which was published in the 1980s on papers which he created in the 1960s, which is a very thorough explanation of many of the complexities around the history of nitrous oxide or laughing gas. If we take this particular plate, for instance, Dr. Syntax and Mrs. Syntax. Well, Dr. Syntax is a series of poems by William Coombe around the 1820s with aquatints by Thomas Rowlandson. In his very thorough study of this print by Smith, he shows that the print is not by Rowlandson and the poem is not by Coombe, and that it shows nitrous oxide being used by a tooth drawer or dentist in 1820, whereas according to conventional history, the use of the gas for that purpose was not discovered until some American dentists discovered it in the 1840s. So this demonstrates some of the complexities around the history of nitrous oxide. The other book that I should mention is entitled Oh, Excellent Airbag, and it's by Adam Green and Mike Jay. And that studies the cultural manifestations of nitrous oxide from the early 19th right up to the end of the 20th century. Unfortunately, during the lockdown, I've had very limited access to these two books, so by way of compensation, I've spent some time looking at another source for which I have had access, and that's a wonderful journal called Chemist and Druggist, which was first produced in Great Britain in 1859. You can see on the left there one of its Art Nouveau covers from 1899, showing its awareness of its history, because it shows on the left the alchemist of old, and then on the right of that left-hand picture, the chemist of today, both shown in sort of Art Nouveau scrollery. And then on the right-hand image, that is one with imperial motifs from the Edwardian period, from time when they were advertising that they were already operating not only in England, but also in Australia. And this, the complete run of Chemist and Druggist, well, the journal was subscribed to by the Wellcome Pharmaceutical Company. And we have the run of their journals in the Wellcome collection and Wellcome library today. And they have all been digitized and are available free online at the URL indicated within the Internet Archive. So if you go into the Internet Archive and look for Chemist and Druggist, you'll find the whole thing there. And the journal continues today. It's called C&D today because the term druggist is not much used by present-day pharmacists. And this will show you the contrast between the graphics now and the graphics as they were today. So there's an enormous amount of social history. There's a lot of humor and fine writing, particularly in the Victorian issues in the 1880s and 1890s, not so much today. So one of the things that, so I thought I would compare some of the humor in the cultural manifestations with the references to laughing gas or nitrous oxide in The Chemist and Druggist. And one of the common features, as I mentioned, is the concentration on the founding legend of nitrous oxide, which seems to provide it with some sort of legitimacy. People trace it back to Joseph Priestley in 1778, who produced nitrous oxide, but couldn't contain it. He couldn't store it and keep it. He could have done, but he was involved in other things such as the American and French revolutions. And so he left it at that. It wasn't until 20 years later, Humphrey Davy from Cornwall got a job at Dr. Beddoes' Pneumatic Institute at Bristol, and he produced nitrous oxide, pondered for some time as to whether he should actually inhale it or whether it would be too dangerous to do so. Eventually decided he would do so, and he described it in a book which he published in 1800, a very long book, in words that have been quoted over and over again throughout the 19th century and also to some extent in the 20th century. I'll just read some of the relevant parts of this. He began to respire unmingled nitrous oxide. A thrilling extending from the chest to the extremities was almost immediately produced. I felt a sense of tangible extension, highly pleasurable in every limb. My visible impressions were dazzling and apparently magnified. I heard distinctly every sound in the room and was perfectly aware of my situation. By degrees, as the pleasurable sensations increased, I lost all connection with external things. He carries on, I theorized, I imagined new discoveries. So this was something completely new, which was of interest to many people, and other people who passed through the Bristol Pneumatic Institute were also invited by Davy to try the nitrous oxide. One of them was the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He says, I felt a highly pleasurable sensation of warmth over my whole frame. The only motion which I felt inclined to make was that of laughing at those who were looking at me. My eyes felt distended, and so on. And I felt more unmingled pleasure than I had ever before experienced. Thomas Wedgwood is another one, and Robert Southey, the subsequent poet laureate, was another person who was prevailed upon by Davy to take the nitrous oxide and provided him with a glowing testimonial to the pleasurable effects of the drug, of the gas. And then in 1800, Humphrey Davy moved from Bristol, or 1801, Humphrey Davy moved from Bristol to London to the new Royal Institution. And so he came with him and he brought with him the knowledge he had acquired in Bristol, in particular the opportunity to experiment by giving nitrous oxide to members of the audience at the Royal Institution. This is Gilray's caricature of 1802. There is an element of the founding origins here because there are sort of Bristol elements hidden here. Bristol, I should say, had a reputation for radicalism and unorthodoxy. The reason why Beddoes was interested in promoting nitrous oxide at his institute was that gases had no place whatsoever in traditional Western medicine derived from Hippocratic tradition. It was something more associated with the French Revolution and Lavoisier, and of course Priestley, who was also a revolutionary. And in the picture, the man on the left who is receiving the nitrous oxide and whose flatulence is shocking the audience on the left of the picture is another Bristolian character and a founder of the Royal Institution in London, Sir John Cox Hippisley. So people, he is probably there as a stooge, being a member of the RI establishment, and also being in on the Bristol origins of nitrous oxide. It's remarkable that this caricature by Gilray, which was produced in, when was it? In the spring of, or summer of 1802, was produced within 12 weeks of this other caricature by Gilray on the cowpox. And both of them have a sort of similar strategy of ambiguous comedy. So we have the Royal Institution one done on the 23rd of May and the vaccination one done on the 12th of June, and both of them published by Hannah Humphrey in St. James's in London. So with the left-hand one, is he laughing at this new introduction from the west of England, nitrous oxide, or is he laughing at the overdressed Mayfair audience for requiring their entertainment to be dressed up as scientific researches and new discoveries in pneumatics? And with the right-hand one, is he ridiculing vaccination for possibly giving us the features of cows? Or is he ridiculing the opponents of vaccination for believing that vaccination gave us the attributes of cows? It's remarkable that these two innovations, nitrous oxide and vaccination, well, the one comes from Bristol in the county of Bristol in the west of England, in having been discovered in 1799, and vaccination coming from Berkeley in the adjacent county of Gloucestershire, published by Edward Jenner from Berkeley in 1798, so just 1 year before. So both Jenner and Davy were working on these remarkable innovations and then bringing them to London and having them both within a few weeks satirized by Gilray in these two rather ambiguous caricatures. So how does, if we turn to the Victorian chemist and druggist, how does that treat something similar? Well, first, one thing I would like to show is this report of the Sheffield Pharmaceutical and Chemical Association in May 1870, having a meeting addressed by George Harrison under the president, Mr. Wilson. And Mr. Wilson took the chair, and the history of laughing gas was described from Priestley to Davy to Wedgwood to Southey. The gas was made experimentally during the Sheffield talk, and its chemical properties were shown. And to illustrate its powers of producing anesthesia, the lecturer, Mr. Harrison, inhaled the gas. This is in the course of the meeting of the association. And in 50 seconds, total insensibility to pain was produced. The president, Mr. Wilson, also inhaled it and caused some amusement on telling the audience his pleasant sensations whilst under its influence. Interestingly, using almost the same vocabulary as had been used by Davy and Coleridge 70 years before. Meanwhile, the cultural manifestations carried on. This is one in 1826 at which Monsieur Henry delivers laughing gas to the audience at the Adelphi Theatre for their amusement. And this takes me up to 1830, which is the date of this print, which shows another aspect of nitrous oxide, which is its association with modern technology. This is a print by Robert Seymour. It's called The March of Intellect, but it's part of it satirizes a social intellectual movement called March of Intellect or March of Progress, based at UCL, University College London, which had been founded in 1826. and associated with the Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge. It had its own magazine called the Penny Magazine, and it was promoted in government by Henry Brougham, Lord Brougham and Vaux. So this is one of the satirical attacks on the movement. It was, or I should say, comic treatments of the movement. The movement itself was deadly earnest, so it laid itself open to comedy by outsiders. One of the scenes is poetry, and it shows an assembly room, and the man in blue on the left is entering the room, and the man in black next to him is explaining what's going on. And he's saying that in this assembly room, this is not the laughing gas, but the hippocrene or poetic gas, sir. The gentleman you see inspired here is throwing out the rough materials for an heroic poem. We have various sorts, let's say, sorts of gas, as the terrific, which is much in request, and the simple, by which all the new songs are done, and many others. So this is the idea that just as laughing gas is a kind of specialist gas for producing laughing, so if technological progress, as advocated by the March of Intellect movement, goes ahead, you could have specialist gases for different genre of poetry, whether it's for epic poems like the one in the front here, or the terrific, which is for producing Gothic works like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1818, or the simple for the new song, so that's songs by people like Charles Dibdin and sea shanties and so on. And in the chemist and druggist, there are also many cases in which its association with advanced technology is shown. These are usually not at all humorous, but they're promoting the drug for anesthetic use. In 1879, the journal is saying that it's a far superior drug to other rival drugs such as ether and chloroform, because many people preferred those other two, but they're saying that it's of use to the dentist. Its effects are too evanescent for prolonged operations. So just as it is used today for its brief effect, so that was a commendation of it in 1879. And a quotation from 1909 saying, in these days to extract teeth without the use of laughing gas is little short of barbarous. It is cruel to the patient, but if the subject is a child, wantonly so. But there is also an ambivalence because people are getting into trouble because of laughing gas. Here's a case recorded in 1868 in the Chemist and Druggist, in which Mr. Moran in Dublin had a toothache and went to some American dentists, and then he went to another dentist in Dublin who gave him a dose of laughing gas, and then the dentist sent him out while he was obviously still groggy from the gas, although that is said not to happen, and was arrested by the police for being drunk and disorderly and thrown into prison and brought before the magistrate, who quashed the conviction and severely reprimanded the police for not taking account of the possible use of laughing gas. And then on the right-hand side, you've got a quotation from more recent issue of what is now C&D, warning about the dangers of laughing gas. Meanwhile, the cultural manifestations carry on, showing ambivalent effects here, introducing fighting as among the prominent effects displayed by the persons under its influence. And you have the use of humorous prints of laughing gas used to advertise very serious chemical textbooks, as it were. So this book by John Griffin tells people how to carry out chemical experiments, but it uses a print of people having a laugh as the frontispiece. That's 1834. In later editions, he drops the frontispiece, having realized that it's quite obviously completely inappropriate. But another author, John Scoffin, produces a very similar literary work and commissions Cruikshank to do the frontispiece again, which has an uproarious scene of laughter, advertising a book which is really all about very serious pictures about and text about how to produce various chemical substances. And this is the print in which he shows how laughing gas is produced. In the meantime, the cultural manifestations carry on right through the Victorian period. And this is a song sung by John Nash and written by him. He was the inventor of a genre called the laughing song, which some people may remember. The Laughing Policeman is a later performer in this genre. And in this song, Nash describes somebody who comes to London from the country and goes to the Regent Street Polytechnic and imbibes laughing gas and ends up badly. I think it's extraordinary that Nash describes this mythical country bumpkin as young Humphrey Brown from Gloucestershire. So there seems to be a sort of memory of the fact that this comes from the West Country, although he calls him Humphrey Brown instead of Humphrey Davy. Lastly, I did intend, before I started this talk, to see if I could find any non-British manifestations of the nitrous oxide craze, because all the ones I found were Anglo-centric. It seemed to me extraordinary that the books about these didn't have the equivalent events and feelings from France or Germany. So I'll just end with one of the ones I found, which is from the Journal of the Goncourt brothers in 1856. The coffee shop seems to me an amusement in its infancy, and that at sometime in the future, with I know not what, you'll have something like the equivalent of laughing gas for 40 centimes, and where the waiters will pour over your whole body a sort of peace and joy, a coffee cup of paradise in these veritable retail outlets of conversation in which the flows of one's soul and the melancholy of one's thoughts will be turned to a side for a brief hour. Thank you very much.